Invincible is back for Season 4 with its standard 3-episode premiere, coming on the heels of what many considered to be one of the strongest episodes in the series as Mark and Eve faced off against Conquest, which in turn came on the heels of the Invincible War. Yeesh, this show does not slow down, and the premiere here keeps up that pace with a lot of new and returning threats thrown into the mix. But while the new stuff is pretty exciting, some of the returning aspects maybe felt a bit repetitive or wheel spinny, but it all gives us a lot to dissect. So let's talk about Invincible Season 4's 3-episode premiere. And a heads up, I, like many fans, am not reading ahead in the comic books. I read the corresponding issues after I've seen the episodes to avoid spoilers, and I'd like to kindly request that you don't spoil ahead for myself or any other viewers. And keep in mind that it means I'll be speculating without any foreknowledge of the comics. Appreciate ya, thanks. Alright, the Season 4 premiere episode is called Making the World a Better Place, and opens with what now feels like kind of a standard emotional musical montage showcasing our main cast entering the season. Mark's entire vibe feels very hardened and existential after the events of Season 3. Even just this opening shot of him floating with space debris above Earth, it's a pretty good image to showcase that something just feels off for him. In general, everyone in the opening seems tired, and that definitely feels like a big part of the theming this season. The way the superhero grind and doing the right thing is simply pushing these characters to their limits. The obligation is really getting to them. Honestly, I really liked this approach. Invincible is often subverting tropes, and I think it's a really interesting juxtaposition to Mark's attitude in the very first episode. He was an emotional wreck because he was struggling to live up to his father. He wanted to be just like him, to be the planet's protector. Obviously, there's a lot more to that scene thematically given Nolan's true nature, but now in Season 4, Mark is literally the planet's strongest hero and the last line of defense. The weight of that responsibility that he was desperate to have is now a reality, and it is heavy. Even Oliver, who now sports a teenage character model, seems pretty nonchalant about his hero work, whereas previously he was chomping at the bit to get out and fight crime. This argument with Oliver, I think, really gets to the heart of how heavy the weight is feeling for Mark and for Oliver. After they have both just gotten home, even before Mark can take a bite of his meal, there's another threat that they have to handle. I like Oliver's shift here to a more brooding teenager, but he's also so young to already be feeling even a fraction of the weight that Mark is. But I also really liked seeing Oliver's growth in this episode. Despite these new brooding teenager vibes, he also seems like he's matured a lot since last season. I particularly loved his response to the slight pushback over his new supersuit, which still features the Omni-man logo. Oliver basically says that his experiences wearing that logo means something too. They mean something to him, and he is now claiming ownership of it. It's not his anymore, it's mine, was one of my favorite moments of the episode. This episode really does feel relentless. The threats never stop. Mark's relationship with his family is strained. Eve's dad forces Mark to face some heavy questions about whether or not being in Eve's life puts her in danger, which, to be fair, as much as Eve's dad sucks, this feels very much like a worst guy you know made a good point situation. It's not unreasonable to examine the fact that the only times Eve has almost died was partially because of Mark, but I also think that Mark is even entertaining this rhetoric says a ton about his mental state. It seems like the longer Mark is a hero, the less of a, for lack of a better term, person he becomes. The realities of the job are just putting him in like this lethargic mental state. Of course, until the realities threaten his loved ones, and then he just kind of flies off the handle. And that's probably the most interesting thing this episode explores, the continued evolution of Mark's moral compass and the circumstances that maybe point out his own hypocrisy. The show has always explored the way being a hero strains and bends Mark's moral compass and sense of self, but at the end of the last season, we got probably the firmest, most substantial vocalization of that from Mark. He straight up says that he will not hesitate to kill anyone who puts his family at risk, which I also sort of think is an understandable feeling to have, to protect your loved ones at all costs, but it really makes the issues he's confronted with in this episode feel like they are pointedly challenging and pushing the limits of that new attitude. This comes in 3 waves. First, Mark faces off against this dinosaur, which is sort of a Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde situation. The dinosaur is basically telling Mark all of the death and destruction in the wake of the most recent global catastrophes are actually a good thing, that humans are the problem and by saving them you're causing more harm than good, which in itself is an interesting thing to unpack, but the sort of Hulk-like aspect of this character is what makes it a perfect way to test Mark's current sense of morality. Because while this dinosaur monster is saying horrible, detestable things and threatening the entire planet, when he transforms back into just a guy, it's clear that they are two completely separate entities. That guy and that dinosaur, completely different brains. Bit of a trolley problem for Mark. Is it okay for him to kill this one innocent guy to save a bunch of other innocent people because that innocent guy turns into a not so innocent dinosaur? And with Mark's general exhaustion and the weight of the traumas he's endured hitting him, I think there's a good shot that he may have just taken this guy out if the Guardians hadn't shown up. The second thing Mark is faced with is, to me, the most interesting of the three. For one, I just love that this is a world where random baddies show up at the worst time and you don't even question it. Alien Thor woman attacking a power plant? Sure. Complete with lightning weapon that only she can wield. But facing off against this person is a great reflection of Mark's shift in principles. Obviously, Mark has to stop her. She is trying to consume the entire power grid and threaten countless lives. But the reality of her motivations are what makes this such a great thing to pit Mark against. She basically reveals that her entire motivation here is to save her people. She needs to gather this power or else her entire species will perish. And isn't that just exactly what Mark is faced with over and over in this episode? After he's made it clear that he will do anything to protect his family and loved ones, is he simply failing to see her parallel motivation? Does he just not care? Or is there just so much on his plate that actually engaging with that philosophical and moral question is too much for him to handle in the moment? If the tables were turned, wouldn't Mark be doing exactly what she is doing? I think probably, to be honest. He pretty specifically calls her out for killing other people in order to save her people, saying it doesn't make sense. And yet, he's faced with two separate trolley problems in this episode, where he prospectively has to kill an innocent person to save others. Which brings us to wave 3, the return of the sequids. Honestly, with the way they had set up the sequids, my initial reaction here was, well, they're just doomed. How do they combat this at all? But the strategy was pretty cool. Isolate and quarantine the entire part of the city while they remove sequid parasites and then teleport the humans out of the area, all while the quarantine force field wanes in power. It's really suspenseful. And I think it makes Mark's breaking point here much more interesting to debate and much more interesting for the characters to take into account. But Mark, knowing that the Earth was literally doomed if the sequids escaped this quarantine, fully murders Russ Livingston to prevent it. But with the force field so close to breaking and also the disruptor to remove the sequids similarly close to getting there, it leaves just about every read of the scenario open to different characters. You did the only thing you could have. The Earth was at risk. Oh, the disruptor was almost there. You didn't need to take that drastic action. I like that it pits the Guardians themselves against each other for a bit, but we'll get there later. I've also enjoyed Rudy's place in the hierarchy this season, or I guess I have to call him Rex now. Honestly, that name swap still might be my least favorite development of the entire series, especially later in episode 3 when we have Eve just openly calling him Rex. It feels extra confusing given her previous personal relationship with the real Rex. It's weird that she doesn't find it weird, to be honest. But Rudy/Rex/robot is obviously no longer the leader of the Guardians, and I find his dynamic with Britt really interesting. Britt is sort of this old school military, you better take orders type, where Robot takes such a logical approach most of the time. And to be fair, if he hadn't broken orders and retreated to the sewers, they probably wouldn't have gotten all the sequids, though there's potentially more consequences coming because of this, we'll see. But that kind of inter-team drama works really well for me. I like that stuff. Obviously, this entire episode is about trolley problems. Over and over, is killing X person worth saving X people? And it even puts Mark briefly on what could be perceived as the other side of that question with Alien Thor Lady. Have they revealed her name yet? I'm just gonna call her Alien Thor Lady. And the episode's relentlessness barrels through to the tag as well, with Conquest waking up and just immediately breaking out of his underground prison. I gotta say, as a viewer, I feel like this is one problem I have with this show. It feels like things happen and then are nearly immediately undone. We're talking one single episode between Conquest being imprisoned and him breaking out. It's like when they killed Liu and then the tag was the reveal that he actually wasn't dead. Like truly just moments after he quote-unquote died. It definitely seems like part of this entire season's story is exploring the idea that their unwillingness to put a permanent end to threats almost always comes back to bite them. But I still think pacing-wise, it just doesn't feel as impactful if Conquest escapes just one episode after he's captured. I do like this knowledge being sort of a ticking time bomb, just waiting for Mark to find out, especially given his headspace this season. He's one of the few beings who can literally go nuclear. There are a few other developments in this episode that play a bigger role as they move into the third episode, so we'll get to those later. For now, episode 402, I'll give you the grand tour, which was definitely the most intriguing of the three for me. This one completely shifts the focus to Nolan and Alan, but before that, we get a major lore flashback set on Viltrum, showcasing a very young Nolan who just looks identical to Mark, which is a nice touch, I think. This whole flashback not only gives us really interesting insight into Viltrum's history, but also peels back the layers on last season's reveal that there are less than 50 Viltrumites left in the universe. But I think the Nolan-centric stuff might be what I found most interesting. This scene where Nolan's literal parents fight him as this sort of trial into adulthood is pretty wild, particularly when you look at it alongside season 1. For one, we see that Nolan had unique relationships to his parents. His mother seemed to fully detest him, whereas his father seemed to have a bit of a softer side, despite him still being relatively nasty because of their Viltrumite ways. But it's interesting that, even though it wasn't structured into his life in the same way, Nolan effectively put Mark through this same kind of trial back in season 1. And even more interestingly, Nolan showed his son mercy in the same way that his own father kinda did here. I think if Nolan's dad hadn't stopped her, Nolan's mother probably would have straight up killed him. I'm curious if Nolan's father's attitude towards him subconsciously affected his decision making when it came to the end of his battle with Mark, or how he treated Mark in general. But obviously the major lore drop here is how and why the Viltrumites were decimated. And the answer was targeted biological warfare, an engineered plague that killed literally billions. I mean, it's really straight up genocide. But I think that's obviously tying into this whole trolley problem theme we're seeing explored in these first few episodes, on a larger scale to be sure, but the Viltrumites were literally conquerors who destroyed, pillaged, and murdered across the universe. That was their whole thing. They did incalculable harm throughout the universe, and this question being posed is, hey, would you kill billions to save the rest of the universe from terror? I feel like in the case of the Viltrumites, it's really not particularly difficult to answer that, because they are kind of just evil incarnate, but the way they visualize the billions of dead bodies is still so deeply unsettling. Literally just thousands of dump trucks worth of dead people, entire seas of corpses in space. Honestly, on the whole, this is kind of a weird episode, but for the most part, I did really enjoy it. It starts with this crazy intense Nolan and Viltrumite lore drop, and then becomes more or less a series of fetch quests as they try to track down weapons to help fight against the remaining Viltrumites. But some of the beats in getting there feel very odd and mismatched tonally. Alan reunites with Telia, which is great. I actually really like Telia, but to go on their quests, they basically recruit a bargain bin Star Trek Next Generation crew. And I mean that pretty literally. They kick in a knockoff Star Trek theme, introduce a bald captain, Warg instead of Worf, Download instead of Data, and Counselor Tuva instead of Counselor Troy. And that's not to say I didn't find this relatively amusing. I just felt like it was an odd juxtaposition with the rest of the subject matter of the episode. But also, I guess anyone unfamiliar with Next Gen probably wouldn't blink an eye here. So I don't know, who knows? I guess it's fine. I do think they might blink at the running gag that Nolan can never sleep because Alan and Telia are constantly banging and they have to share quarters, which I do think is a good gag that they maybe relied on like 2 or 3 times too many. But everyone disagreed with me about the Powerplex Invincible title card bit from last season, so I fear I may be in the minority on these kind of things. I think by far the most interesting thing about this episode, besides the insight into Nolan and Viltrum's history, is seeing Nolan wrestle with his upbringing and his newly budding sense of morality. I've talked about Mark and Nolan's sort of inversed arcs a lot. In fact, my first Invincible video after season 2 was on that specifically, but I think this episode goes the longest way to really unpack Nolan's relation to that Viltrumite indoctrination. Obviously, since season 1, Nolan has already come a long way undoing doing a lot of his Viltrumite programming. But thanks to that flashback, we get a great look at literal life on Viltrum, exactly what he experienced. And the realities of that society are that if you show literally any sense of morality or perceived weakness, anything that strays outside of the Viltrum way, you will die. Not to mention Viltrumites live thousands of years. So I think it's very difficult to fully comprehend this theoretical level of indoctrination. And I like that the story is specifically exploring that despite the clear shift in his moral compass, it is still unfathomably difficult for him to break free from that indoctrination. His actions and words are completely misaligned. He cannot bring himself to vocally commit to being part of the resistance, even though all of his actions are fully arming that resistance. This is probably most interesting when he meets the Betrayer, the man we learn murdered Viltrum's emperor Argal. By all metrics, Nolan is doing kind of the same thing here. He is betraying the Viltrum Empire for the betterment of the universe. Yet, because he was raised to loathe the Betrayer, he cannot shake those deep-seated feelings of rage when he learns who this guy is. It's honestly, I think, a really fascinating exploration of the difficulties of breaking free from indoctrination. We even see Nolan still clinging to the notion that maybe some of the things they did in the name of the Viltrum Empire were good, like stopping wars, even if they stopped those wars through authoritarianism and murder. And he still laments the decimation of the Viltrum people, even with his newfound stance on the Empire as a whole, which I also think is understandable. His new shift in perspective isn't going to remove the things he felt while watching billions on his own planet die. But Alan makes a great point that the Scourge could have been this turning point for Viltrum, where they finally understood the devastation that they were putting others through, but instead they doubled down. All of this ruminating on the nature of indoctrination and the continuing shift in Nolan's perspective is for sure the best part of this episode for me. Not to say the rest didn't have things I enjoyed. I like the feeling that they're putting together this ragtag team of disparate fighters, weapons, creatures, etc., so they can barely stand a chance against this overwhelming threat. It's definitely doing some very exciting stage setting. I also really like that it seems like Nolan is forming a real connection and friendship with Alan. He's fully confiding in him despite the very complicated and messed up nature of his history, and it really speaks to how Nolan has changed, even if he's fighting himself from the inside out. But obviously the big moment comes at the end. The revelation that the Betrayer was also responsible for the Scourge virus nearly sends Nolan over the edge, and I think this once again ties to that exact thing the first episode was exploring: trolley problems on steroids. Nolan tears this guy apart over bringing the Viltrumites to the brink of extinction, killing billions, to which he obviously points out that Viltrum was responsible for killing billions themselves. There's a real cognitive dissonance here for Nolan, and the reality is that they would have continued to kill billions more if they hadn't been crippled. And it really is just another example of that same question being explored over and over here. Granted, there's nuance to each instance, and they aren't flat out exactly the same. None of these are just straight up trolley problems, but it's all the question of what level of killing or murder is justifiable if it prevents greater death and destruction. It's a question Mark was faced with against that Jekyll and Hyde dinosaur, and with the Sequids, it ties into alien Thor lady's motivations. And now with Nolan off to recruit Mark, it's going to be really interesting to see how this whole interaction goes. Mark and Nolan last left off in an interesting place, but also Nolan returning to Earth is just going to be a huge question mark. Like, obviously, pretty much nobody on Earth is going to accept Nolan's return on almost any terms. But the reality is that Earth is reaching its breaking point, going through just relentless threats. It feels like in order for Mark to even consider being able to leave Earth to go help these resistance fighters, there would have to be some support in just stabilizing everything. I kind of hope we see Nolan just helping the planet get at least to a reasonable stability level, just for the drama of that circumstance. And despite the fact that I don't see any way Omni-man could have any sort of public redemption, I appreciate it as a bit of potential personal redemption for him, a representation of Nolan's ongoing change without absolving him at all. I also am just really eager for a Nolan/Oliver reunion. That feels like it could go a number of ways, particularly given Oliver's current suit logo. Maybe even more interesting will be a Nolan-Debbie reunion, especially with all the Paul developments. Lots of melodrama ahead, I'm sure. And then we've got the Thragtag, our first look at Lee Pace's performance as the new Viltrumite Big Bad, and I guess what better way to introduce him than to show the previous Viltrumite Big Bad bowing down to him. Overall, this second episode definitely delivered the stuff that had me most eager for the story moving forward, adding tons of context with major lore drops, character history, and of course setting up the Nolan/Mark reunion. Episode 3, I Gotta Get Some Air, returns us to Earth and pretty directly follows the developments in the first episode. In fact, it's largely just a lot more of what we got in that one. Relentless attacks on Earth as the available heroes' numbers and capabilities continue to dwindle. But at first, it catches us back up with our old pals Titan and Machine Head, who have obviously had an interesting journey so far. Initially full-on rivals as Titan ousted Machine Head, later turned reluctant allies as Titan was able to maintain his place in the hierarchy, while Machine Head sort of vaulted past him into the head honcho position. Now both on the defensive because Liu didn't die, so they've got a whole dragon to deal with again. This episode has a ton of characters ruminating on Mark's decision at the end of episode 1. Even though Cecil admits that he would have made the same decision, he's concerned because he knows this is out of the ordinary for Mark. But man, it's kind of crazy how tenuous the remaining threads between Cecil and Mark are. Obviously, Cecil is justified in trying to maintain a connection with Mark and to try to prevent him from going rogue, but the fact that Mark is eventually going to learn both that Cecil let Conquest escape and that he commissioned Sinclair to make Reaniman out of Invincible's multiversal corpses, yeesh, that's gonna be crazy when the other shoe drops, and then the other shoe as well. Speaking of Sinclair, I thought his attempted apology to Mark was very interesting. It's not like this is a character we've given any real time to explore on a personal level, so for me, the apology sort of felt like it came out of nowhere, and really makes me wonder if it's earnest or hollow. Maybe seeing the aftermath of the Invincible War and or studying Invincible's corpses up close is making Sinclair realize how dangerous of an enemy he's made, or maybe he really does feel guilt and shame. But I think this also could maybe be meant to act as a potential parallel to other characters, one we might potentially see Mark be more forgiving towards, despite doing comparable or worse things, or maybe even a mirror to Mark himself, where he'll have to face things he feels guilty about and ask for forgiveness elsewhere. I don't think I really considered Sinclair's agency in all this before this scene. To me, it always just felt like he had no other choice: help Cecil or go to prison. The other big development I didn't talk about in episode 1 was the fact that Eve's powers are mysteriously on the fritz, which is obviously just like the worst imaginable timing. She's completely out of commission, which lends to two big aspects of the episode that I appreciate. For one, Mark is having this ongoing crisis of identity. He keeps making these very strong decisions in his hero work that are justifiable, but also very contrary to the guy that he has been. And the only person he's willing to open up to about this is Eve. Unfortunately, when Eve is also going through this major crisis, it's hard for Mark to put the spotlight back on himself. I like that they're both there for each other as a couple as they struggle, but it also then makes it feel like neither can really be all there for each other because of their struggles. And then on top of that, Eve is one of the most reliable and powerful heroes on Earth. Losing her during these major crises is kind of devastating. It feels like a lot of these episodes are just becoming these like repeated perfect storms. This climax sees Invincible have to lead the Guardians against the Flaxons while he's going through this intense personal crisis, and because Eve is out of commission, they have to send Oliver to help Titan with the Invincible Ink duties. And the two big battle sequences are pretty fun here. I just wish it weren't two things we'd sort of maybe seen already in other episodes. We've seen Liu go dragon mode, we've seen the Flaxons attack, and I know there's a thematic point there, but as a viewer, I'm maybe craving something new. Luckily, they did a lot of great stuff in here that has me vibrating with speculation moving forward. I've been saying this entire video that it really feels like Earth is reaching its limits with how much it can handle, and though the Flaxon fight does end up going their way, the losses are kind of incalculable. Let's talk about the big Rudy cliffhang. Damn it, I keep calling him Rudy. I meant Rex. Sorry I keep dead naming him, but like, we all think it's insane that he stole Rex's DNA and then his name, right? That is bug nuts. I'm just gonna call him Robot. Early in this episode is when we see Robot really railing on Invincible's decision and pushing back against Brit's orders from the Sequid invasion. And I found it pretty funny how just like immediately he changed his tune after realizing there was a Sequid inside of him. But this development obviously has me really curious what to expect next. For one, it means literally any of the Sequid survivors could have stragglers within them, and if you didn't inform Cecil about that shit, then they are in danger. And two, I think this could make for some crazy interesting developments given the end of the Flaxen story. The big cliffhang is that both Robot and Monster Girl, after taking down the emitter in the Flaxen's dimension, both get trapped there. Obviously, a major loss for Earth, but also, Jesus, how the hell are they gonna get out of there? Okay, but let's just speculate. What if one of those two also has a Sequid inside of them? Are we gonna see the Sequids attach themselves to the Flaxen army and then like re-invade Earth? Two enemies combined into one? Or are we just gonna see Robot like completely take over the Flaxens? There's lots of potential here, and I'm really eager to see how it all plays out. There was this other moment that really hit me. Early in the episode, we see Titan going absolutely sicko mode on this magnet samurai guy after his family was threatened. Kind of a common thread this season, people not holding back in defense of their loved ones. And then, after Mark realizes the danger Oliver was in while helping Titan, he does the exact same thing to Titan that Titan was doing earlier in the episode. It's just an interesting parallel, and the fact that Oliver was the one who pulled Mark back down to Earth and brought him to his senses, I think says a lot about where he's at. There's this other moment earlier in the episode where he expresses such genuine concern for Mark's mental state. I appreciate seeing Oliver really find a sense of humanity this season, despite not being a human at all. Okay, then there's the tag, which seems to reveal the source of Eve's power malfunction. She's real pregnant. Damn, y'all, your whole job is to protect the Earth, but you can't use just like a tiny bit of protection yourselves. Just more perfect storms, right? I'm sure this will not take any emotional tolls on the already fragile mental states of our very young heroes. But seriously, I feel like a surprise pregnancy would usually be sort of a hacky move in a lot of media, but I think I see the Matrix code here, and the sheer number of things that this throws a wrench into makes it such a great chaotic move in my opinion. For one, Eve out of hero commission for 9 months. Big oof right there. Two, Mark just absolutely reeling, completely losing his sense of self and it interfering with his hero duties already, now having to worry about Eve's well-being while pregnant and being a father. It's gonna entirely shift his priorities as the Earth is struggling most. But I think the familial stuff is by far the most interesting here, because obviously Eve's dad absolutely sucks and is gonna go insane when he finds out. But also, we know that the Nolan reunion is imminent. How is he gonna react to finding out he's gonna be a grandfather? Will it further shift his moral compass? Will he try to be a part of that kid's life? Will Mark let him? Not to mention, he still hasn't seen Debbie since the "I think I miss my wife" line in season 2. How is the Debbie and Paul of it all going to affect this big, messy ass familial situation that continues to get messier? Honestly, give me more of that sweet, sweet soap opera superhero drama. I am here for it. I think on the whole, I am slightly torn on this 3-episode premiere. There are obviously a ton of developments that have me really excited and feel like they'll hold a ton of dramatic and thematic value. And I do understand that thematically, part of the season is about how the danger the Earth faces is just relentless. Enemies we thought were vanquished return over and over again at the worst imaginable time. There is no break, no breather. It's meant to overwhelm. I think that all works great, but as a viewer, it's also hard not to feel like some of these repeat threats are like reheated nachos. Oh, the Sequids and Liu's dragon and the Flaxens, they're all back. It can feel like their return lacks impact when it's just an onslaught of returning enemies. Some have barely been gone at all. We saw Liu resurrect in the tag of the episode that they thwarted him last season. Others feel like they were gone so long that there was zero buildup, like the Flaxens, who we last saw in the 2nd episode of the entire show. But I can't deny that the character drama and ever-changing relationship dynamics are just as strong as ever. The show is obviously always cool, but for me, the most important thing is that it always makes me really ruminate on countless aspects of life through the spectrum of this gnarly superhero universe. Mark and Nolan's parallel inversed arcs are as fascinating as ever, and the fact that we're finally going to get another reunion after a couple of seasons has me more excited than almost anything else in the series. But that's all I've got for you. I am still deciding exactly how I cover this season, whether that's week by week or in multi-episode chunks over the course of the next couple months, but I will be covering it in one way or another, so stay tuned. Let me know if you have a preference there, and also let me know what you thought of these premiere episodes. Thanks for watching. Peace.
I stay mellow watching Johnny two cellos. He talks cartoons, he's a really cool fellow. He keeps you posted on adult cartoons. If that's what you're into, then grab a spoon and a very big bowl of your favorite cereal. Feels like Saturday morning cartoon material. Johnny two cellos, watch him on YouTube. Now enjoy this groove and bust a move.